Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mindset Shifts program. My name is Eugene, and today my guest is David Lindemuth. And today our job is to connect, collaborate, and share the latest ideas on practices and human behavior, communications, and leadership. Today, David is with us here, and David is entrepreneur, professional negotiator, which is an unusual title. And David, I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it that you do?
Okay, well, a professional negotiator is an idea I've taken on recently. I've been fascinated with negotiations all my life. Before I owned my own business, which was a long time ago, I noticed that when I wanted something, I had a bit of a relentless attitude about getting it, and I was willing to suggest things to people where in retrospect, it seemed very unlikely that they would want to give it to me. And yet I discovered that there was a great deal of power just in the act of asking for something, even if it seemed ridiculous, even if it seemed implausible. I got used to people giving it to me. It seemed mostly because I kind of dared to ask. I sort of got some enthusiasm on my face. And so in the 1990s, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it seems to me that genuine curiosity is kind of the thing that runs within your blood from the early age, and you dare to ask, you dare to be curious. And this is what I've noticed in my life too. Not a lot of people are actually capable, courageous enough to do that.
Well, the interesting thing, I would say, years ago when I first discovered I had this skill, I wasn't so much curious as I was intensely determined, almost forceful. And more recently, I've encountered the idea about curiosity as a negotiation tactic, and there's far less effort. If I am curious about what you do, rather than forceful about what I want you to do, it's a lot easier for me to sort of discover, first off, can we collaborate? Can you help me? Can I help you? And second off, it's easier for me to um, I want to say guide, but it's not even that. It's easier for me to just allow you to do what you're going to do anyway, and join in with that. Which is really interesting. It's a far less forceful, far less effortful way of getting the same result. So, more recently, I did a lot of study with Chris Voss and his idea of tactical empathy. I've studied a lot of people, and I've really fleshed a lot of it out in real life negotiations, in business, in relationship, in consulting people, in helping them to get into business.
Wow. So, David, I would like to ask you, how do you define negotiations? What is a negotiation for you?
Well, for quite some time, I believe that whenever we open our mouth, whenever anyone opens their mouth, they're trying to tell us something important, and they want something. And it's not always expressed in just that clear of a way. If someone might say to you, "You're being an ass," but they want something, but they've expressed it in a way that makes it a lot harder for me to understand what they want, and a lot harder for me to be willing to give it to them. And so I grew fascinated with that. If I want something, if I open my mouth, if I have the energy, if I have to overcome my own inhibitions to talk to you, I want something. And vice versa. If anyone has to bridge that gap, the hesitance, the embarrassment, the mistrust to talk to me, they want something. So it's always a negotiation. Okay, you're approaching me, you want something. And lately I've learned I want to know what you want. Maybe I have it. Maybe you have something I'd like to trade for it. So I'm at this point in my life, I'm very open to that. If you say, "Hey, I got this new business idea, I want to bounce it off you," I say, "Well, sure." Now, it might not be a fit. It may be really, really quickly seem to be out of my ballpark. But if I'm curious, I'll find that out. Then if I'm not curious, I might have just bypassed a lot of money, a good friendship, a date. Who knows? I might have bypassed it by an unwillingness to just say yes to you being present in my life. Or I might bypass it by trying to dominate you or frustrate you to try to have the upper hand. And I think I used to do quite a lot of that.
Well, it's
But
very
I've
interesting,
discovered,
David. I'd like to dive in a little bit of what you said. You said that when someone is even saying to you you're an asshole, they saying something that they want. They just probably communicating very badly. Like it's maybe not the most effective way to get the point across. And at the same time, this is probably the only way they know how to communicate certain ideas. And what I notice happening quite often is that the emotions, when they overpower us, we tend to get louder, of course. But the thing is, as we get louder, the other person hears us less. And there's this great expression: the louder you speak, the less I can hear you. In essence, because what you're saying to me is not becoming logical, is not becoming rational. It's just showing kind of a tantrum in a kid, right? It's a big tantrum. And the louder you shout, the bigger the tantrum is. And that was within us for, since the childhood, since we first learned how to do tantrums, and it's never went away. It's just something that we learn how to transition to certain stages, but it's still there. We still throw tantrums.
I agree. And having my daughter really helped me with that. I have a daughter who doesn't throw tantrums because I decided that at birth that whatever she wanted, I would say yes to it. That my default setting is yes. And if there's something where it's really important or valuable to say no, where I have to teach her about protection or social graces, where I have to redirect her, that's so rare. That no is important, but it's rare. And so I can say no to her, and she's like, "Oh, this is an unusual experience. This is more important to Dad than most of the other things I ask about." And then when I say no to her, 9 times out of 10, I'll think about it for a second. Was it really necessary to say no, or was I conditioned from my life to say no? And 9 times out of 10, it's just a knee jerk. It's a no that I didn't have to say. And I'll take a second and say, "You know what? I'm sorry, sweetie. There was no reason for me to deny you that." And because I'm coming out with offering her opportunity when it really has to be no, she accepts that with a great deal of grace. And so tantrums are often because people, they've been said no to forever, always, for no reason. They expect me to say no. So they want to convince me before they've even heard me say yes. You know what I mean? It's like before you even have, before anyone has a chance to say yes or no, they're assuming I'm going to say no. And they lay out a case. And it can be aggressive. It can be obnoxious. It can be entirely unnecessary. But you're right. It's a default state of tantrum.
It's so interesting that you said the default answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say this is in your family, with your close friends, or this is with everyone that you talk to? Like, do you
I,
make a distinctions there?
I constantly work to grow it to everyone. But some people by default make it much more difficult. But the first default is, can I talk to you? Well, yes. Just curiosity. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to offer? I'm no longer in a deep suspicion that you're going to try and harm me. And I used to be. I was raised in a culture like that. I can give you an example. 2 days ago, I was down at the beach. I'm in California, and a couple of young men walked up to me and my friend and said, on the beach, they made a point of real intently, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you doing?" Well, immediately I knew they were selling something. They they weren't just being friendly to strangers, although they could have been. They wanted something from us. I said, Really good. How are you doing?" And I entered a conversation with them. And ultimately, they were part of a religious group, and I don't know exactly what their end goal was. They wanted to talk about their spirituality and mine, and so we did. And it was actually a wonderful conversation. And when they got to a point where I disagreed, you said, uh, here's where my opinion departs from yours a little bit, and it's made my life a little bit difficult until I worked this out. But I explained to them why it wasn't likely that I was going to adopt their point of view, but I've really appreciated them for being there. And we wound up the conversation in a very friendly way, and they went on their way. I didn't end up just getting more and more uncomfortable trying to tolerate them until I had to say, "Get out of my space." I allowed the conversation to be a natural extension of the goodwill between humans. And it ended that way as well. They didn't exactly get what they thought they were going to get, but I'd like to believe in a certain way they got more. They really had a genuine human interaction, and we were both able to go on with our day without thinking, "Oh, I wish that had never happened." So that I
Wow,
like it better that way.
really interesting take. And yeah, lots of communications are based on kind of a fear, tension, anxiety response. And perhaps it has to do with something you said, that people are used to, they expect no, and that raises the resistance within them, this anxiety, the stress that now I have to plow through this nose, and I have to submit you, I have to win you over. And it's, when you're thinking like this, it's clearly someone is winning and someone is losing here, because it's based on submission, based on sort of a force yourself through this, sway your opinion, and so on and so forth. And it's very, it's very fascinating to see when this shift happens in people. Like, when they hear this new response, there is no resistance coming from your part, and you talk to them, and they kind of amazed, like, it, and stumble in the same time. What's happening here? Like, there is no resistance here, you just flow with the conversation. And share one story with you. So I was out, and I saw the gentleman is giving some cash to the homeless person. So I decided to engage in a little experiment. I, come behind him, tap him on the shoulder, and said something to the effect of, "Good evening. I mean, what you've done just right now was amazing." And the gentleman in front of me, it took him, I'm not kidding, 5 seconds. He would just, "Yeah, it's a tough times. We ought to take care of each other." And it's like, yeah. It's like, "Well, thank you so much and have a great evening." And that's it. And I could see within this 5 seconds, so much happened within him, because it is not uncommon. Like, it's not a common thing to experience. People don't communicate that much too often about genuine thing that's happening in front of you. Like, people like to complain. It's like, "Oh, this horrible. This is atrocious. This is like revolting," right? But when something good happens, when something authentic happens in front of you, people tend to kind of thought it's a fluke, or something not worth paying attention to at all.
Yeah, yeah. And people get used to having to justify themselves. Like there's this default setting that you're going to communicate. The only reason you would reach out to communicate with him is to tell him he's doing something wrong and correct him. This is not necessarily true in most cases, but it's often an underlying feeling. In fact, if we really realize that most people expect to be insulted or put down or punished or corrected, we would go at them a little more predisposed, a little more careful. In fact, just yesterday, I was staffing a workshop. I was telling you about that earlier. And there's men, and there was one guy come a tremendously long way. He used to be a gang member, very, very tough man. And he's much gentler, much softer. He wants a more peaceful life than what he once had, but he grew up in a very hard world. He's a guy you couldn't pay me to mess with. It's like he's a nice guy if you respect him, and he's capable of protecting himself if you don't. And another guy just bumped into him in a way that he interpreted as just negligent and disrespectful. And the other guy almost certainly didn't mean it that way. It just really, but this guy came from a world where if you bump into me, you're testing me. And if you're testing me, I have to prove to you that you better not do that. And so he has this underlying character. And if we believed that every person was capable of killing us when we disrespected them, we would think a minute about how we treated them. We think, and it wasn't even being bumped that bothered him. It was the guy didn't apologize. And the guy didn't apologize because he hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't meant to disrespect him. Yet, if he had just looked at who he was dealing with and said, "Oh man, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to disrespect you. That was an accident, I apologize," the other guy would have been okay. But because the first guy, the guy who had not made an offense, was accused of making offense, he took offense. In other words, they co-participated in derailing it because both of their pride got involved. And if it's just please, thank you. I was listening to interviews by a guy who had spent a lot of his life in prison. He said, in prison, it's please, thank you, excuse me, if you want to survive. He said, just simple human respect goes a long way in a place where the people will kill you if you don't give it to them. And we're out here in the world where we're more or less safe from that consequence. And we're just not that careful. We approach each other with too much aggression and too much neglect. But beyond that, if someone approaches me that way, I have the right to protect myself. But if I think for a minute, okay, what's going on? How did I trigger this in you? I can step back from that. I apologize. I didn't mean to get here. What do we need to do? Makes a difference.
We kind of approaching a very interesting topic how do you deal with emotions in negotiations, in communications? How do you not get hooked by them? How do you not react, but rather respond to the situation? Just like the example you gave, when two gentlemen bump into each other and both of them suddenly had to defend their pride. And they participated in this act like an animalistic act to show the hierarchy of dominance, who's going to submit to whom. And eventually all of them lost, because when later on they got home, maybe they will come back with their thoughts to the situation, and some of them might think, well, what if I just took it wrong, right? So then it becomes a doubt, like, did what I do was actually a correct way of dealing with the situation? How did it benefit anyone? And pride it's very interesting, pride itself. But before we actually dive into that, I would love to ask you this, David, like, at what point of your life did you decide that you need to study communication? At what point of time you decided that it's essential in your life to build upon the skills?
That's interesting. When I actively started studying negotiation as a study, was when I became interested in business on a higher level. I think I've had an entrepreneurial spirit since, probably always wanted to start my own business or do something other than have a job. And I broke away from that in 1988. I definitely became self-employed and having to generate my own income. And it was difficult. I was doing something. I actually got into the holistic health field, and that is its own. That's not at the time for me. That wasn't seen as matching well with being an entrepreneur, doing this service for human beings and trying to figure out how to get money from them for this service. When you're doing a direct service and no one's doing the selling for you, um, uh, it's a little bit difficult. It's emotionally difficult. The first time I did a professional session, I didn't know how to ask for the money. I was like, I'd do this for free. This is how I want to exchange my life force for people, but I want to get paid for it because I don't want to work. I want to do this. And so I did that for a number of years, and I actually made an okay living at it. But I got hit by some personal situations that were extremely difficult, devastating to me. And I decided, in retrospect, I decided incorrectly. But at the time, I thought I wouldn't have this problem if I had more money. Now that's always wrong. Money wouldn't have solved that problem, but I had it arranged that it could have, and I got really interested in making a lot of money, what to me seemed to be a lot of money. And so that's when call it marketing and sales and negotiation, I really wanted to understand them at a higher level. And I started studying with successful people. And I discovered that a somewhat adversarial style of negotiation was good. I became a real estate investor.
But David, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Like, give us a timeline. How long it's been since you dealing with this? Is it how many years, shall we say?
I really got into the higher level business.
Higher level business, your more resources dedicated towards improving your communication skills, whether it's a sales, whether it's just understanding of the psychological ideas and all that jazz.
As it specifically applies to business, that probably started around 1996. Now, what you brought up something really interesting there. The psychological ideas were something I was fascinated in from a very young age, and I've been in martial arts from a very young age, and that exposed me to a fascination of psychology because, for lack of a better word, fighting is a very psychological process. And when I was younger, I wanted to cultivate my strength and call it my masculinity. I wanted to be seen as a powerful man. And so, you do the muscular development and you think about the psychological development. That's still a big underlying thread in my life, although my practice now is much different than it was when I started. Then, when that rose to the level of higher level business was around 1996. And I studied marketing people, and I had a mentor, and I would study negotiators per se. A big name who a lot of people have probably heard is Herb Cohen. I was real interested in him. I went to see him speak live, and he was really interesting. There were a couple others, and I wish I could remember their name to give them credit. There were a couple of very high-powered people that I studied with, and it became fascinating to me. It's like a martial art. It's the science of war, is the way I saw it. Now I'm seeing it differently. It's a different science at this point.
So who among all of these people that you have in mind are the most influential to you over the years?
You know, the funny thing, this will probably sound a little bit strange, but the person who became most influential was me. My own experience was beginning to lead me towards a path where I saw, wow, I can do anything I want. So I was learning tactics from various people, but I guess what you learn is that worked for them. Which of their principles will work through me? So there's a synthesis. There's this way of taking what works, trying out stuff, or finding that I can't try it. You can tell me that works, but I can't do it. It upsets me so badly. It's almost like my instincts are saying that doesn't fit me. And a lot of people will say you just confront your fear until you don't have it anymore, and that might work for some people. For me, I I was like, my instincts say no to this. I trust that more than I trust forcing myself. And so it was like a way of picking up pieces that fit for me. And if they fit, I can deliver them with confidence. And if I can deliver them with confidence, people are instilled with a sense of trust. And that's what I really discovered. If you can deliver an idea with confidence, people will tend to trust in you for that. And you get a lot of results when people trust you.
So how do you cultivate confidence? How do you cultivate trust in your own abilities when the odds are against you?
That's a really good question, because the answer I'm about to give you almost contradicts what I just said, and that is fake it till you make it. So I just said, don't force yourself through something, but then now I'm about to say, but in a way, I wouldn't say I was forcing it, but it's almost like, oh, this is an act. I'm now confident. I believe what I'm telling you. I am what I just said I am. And you say that when you don't believe you are. When I wanted to be a real estate investor, I started telling people I am a real estate investor. And I got one of my earliest partners I met at a Halloween party before I had ever done an actual investment deal. I was looking for partners, and someone at a party said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a real estate investor." And he said, "Really? That's fascinating. I want to get into that too." And I had this offer, and I said, "Oh, well, I'm actually looking for partners. Do you want to talk about this?" He said, "Yeah." And I was able to structure my first successful deal with that conversation. I wanted to be it. I had learned enough that I could do a deal. Now I needed partners and mentors and everything. That's how I got my mentor. I said, I, I said I'm an investor to someone who said that to someone else. I said what I needed, who said that to someone else. The someone else said, I know someone who likes to help beginners. Would you like to meet him? I said, yes, I would. And then I had to sit down in front of him. And with him, I knew I couldn't bluff him. So I had to be curious. What do you do? And my last question to him was, I said, this is exactly what I want to do. What would make it worth your time to help me? And he hesitated a moment. He'd never heard a question like that before. He went, what? I said, you have abilities in a realm where I want to excel. And I need to know what would make it valuable to you to help me. And he said, just become my client. I said, done. And that was fascinating, how easy that was. I didn't lie.
It's very interesting, the point of questions. And actually, you mentioned something before, that you were doing things for free because you didn't know how to ask for money. So it seems like, to the moment that you describe right now, when you become a real estate investor, and the space when you were doing some business for free, don't know how to ask for money, there was a certain gap you had to bridge and understand how to ask for money. So how do you approach your offer creation? How do you make that offer? How do you make those steps?
Well, now because I'm an investor, and the reason I like to call myself a professional negotiator is because now what you would call my pitch is, if I help you make money, I get some of it, and that's it. Period. It's like, I'm not going to ask you for a consulting fee and try and tell you what to do. And if you do it, you make money. And if you don't, you lose. And I get paid either way. I like to think on the scale where, if you're going to do something that might make a lot of money and you need my help, I'll say, actually, I can see how this would work. And I can see how this could help you. And then set up a deal like that. Set up a deal where I can own a percentage of the results, and where this is in my case, you're not at risk for you're not financially at risk for working with me. You're not at risk of giving me money and getting nothing in return. Now, that doesn't mean we won't do deals where you might have risk in the deal, but I'm not the risk. If you're losing money, I'm also losing money. So that's a powerful position to be in a deal, and you really have to identify yourself as an entrepreneur and an investor to do that. That particular mindset's not well suited to just anybody, because I guess you could say it's a high performance position. It's a promise. That's it. I won't get paid unless I can do what I said I would do. And so I have to be judicious about what I say I can do. And often that's like my first real estate partnership is jumping into something where I don't necessarily know how to do, but I just told you I'm going to do. But I have a very high level of confidence that I can do it. So, it's bootstrapping. It's like, well, if I look at your deal, I've never done exactly that before, but I know what needs done. And it turns out I'm pretty sure I can do that. And that's an offer.
So that would be, a mindset of how to make an offer. What is your positioning here? And so what would be the first three steps, the most essential steps you should take, or shall we say three things to keep in mind when creating an offer, when making an offer?
The one that most people overlook, number one, is you got to listen. You can't look over at somebody and say, oh, it looks like I can make money off of them, and go at it that way. You can. That's a salesman's typical way of doing it. You have money, I want money, how can I get it from you? But if
so
you're listening,
would be like discover, right? Discover the opportunity.
Yeah. What do you really do? Do you really want to do it? Are you going to be doing it in 6 months once I've put energy into you? Will it make money? Is it a pipe dream? Will it make a lot of money? Will it kind of only make a little money? Will it make a lot of money for a little bit of effort? Will it make a little bit of money for a lot of effort? Can I rely upon you? What do you actually need that I can bring to the table? And if all those if those questions can't be answered in a way that makes sense, it's not a deal. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. I don't hate you because of it. But the first thing I've discovered is it's not a deal, but it sure has been a fun conversation. But if you dig in a little while, it's like, well, this looks like a deal. And then so frequently the next thing I say is, let me think about this for a couple of days. I see some things here, and I'm going to bounce a few ideas around in my brain and come back to you. And usually I only do that if we seem hooked into each other to begin with. Like if there's enthusiasm and optimism and it looks like we both see the possibility, then it's like, well, let me turn my brain on this. And then, so that's what I think is step number 2. You got to let it stew a few days. Everybody needs to close the deal right this minute. You know, car salesman, what'll it take to have you buy a car before you leave this lot?
Okay,
Then
so it seems to me it's like stay calm, like let it sit on it, process it first, give it some thought. So we have
yeah.
discover or listen, sit on it, or
Mm-hmm.
calm the heck down, and what will be the third step?
You got to come back with a concrete plan. Chris Voss says, yes is nothing without how. Now you got this good idea sitting out there in the ethers. If one of you doesn't have the organizational capacity to say, okay, here's how we initiate, here's the path we're going to follow, here's where it's going to lead to. That doesn't mean you know every detail, but it means you can conceptualize a process that makes sense. You can set up the probabilities in your favor because I see a path. Now, all kinds of obstacles and errors can arise on that path. That's a different issue. That has to do with problem solving and tenacity. But if you have that path, you can start. And I'm very confident in that. The problem a lot of people have with opportunity is they want it to just appear and happen. But there's lots of opportunities. You gotta pick the ones you can actually incorporate into your life. Um, I used to say I get 100 good ideas a day. I see lots of people doing things that are great that I can't do. So a lot of opportunity has to do with, what can I do? And keeping your eyes really open to that.
Wow. And how do you see it, like in terms of positioning yourself? How much difference does it make in your case, like whether you approach first asking for business or someone's approaching you asking for business? How do you see it on your end?
Well, that's also an interesting question because when you're having certain successes, the word somehow gets around and people approach you. They either want to do business with you or they want to pick your brain. And so sometimes at first when I was having early successes, I wanted to really help people. And I'd have a 2-hour conversation with them, and then I'd end with a little piece of advice. Here's what you want to do, and then they wouldn't do it, and I would get really upset. Like you used up my time and my genius, and you won't even do what I say, and that's a little bit ridiculous. If I think you got to clear a little bit earlier. Is this the kind of person who is going to uh, move forward? And then you can have a really open-ended conversation with them and maybe do business with them and maybe not, but you don't feel like you wasted your time on a wannabe.
Right. So you got to
Somebody,
properly qualify the person in front of you.
yeah.
And what are some of the clues that you seeking out for when you going through your own qualification process, when you going from zero to realization? Okay, that is someone that I can invest my time, my energy, with or in, and get the results.
Well, mostly, and you said approaching opportunities versus having opportunities approach you. I have a default listening right now is with anyone I meet, existing friends, people I've just met, doesn't matter. I'm always listening a little bit. Is there an opportunity here for me? And I think I used to be a little pushy for that, a little agenda driven, but now it's just people are going to talk about what's important to them, and they're going to brag about what they're doing well, and they're going to, in subtle ways, ask for help. That goes back to the original premise. Whenever someone opens their mouth, they want something. They want to be accepted, invited, included. In fact, that's 99% of what humans want from one another. If you could get that without money, people wouldn't care about money at all. That's my opinion. So if they're opening their mouth, they're talking about, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. They want you to think I'm a cool, interesting person. I'm successful. I want you to like me. But someone I'm doing business with right now was doing that. And I said, wait a minute, tell me a little bit about this. This is really interesting. He started going down his pitch and I listened. He sounded like he knew what he was doing. I said, this is fascinating to me. I used to invest in real estate. And then now he's curious about me because he wanted to take it to a different level. He said, well, tell me about this. This is what I want to do. I said, well, this is how I did it. And I described some deals. And, when I want to look interesting, when I want to look successful, I have some really good stories to tell. You cherry pick your best stories, and they're very powerful successes. And then it makes an impression on somebody who wants to do something. And between the impression he made on me and the impression I made on him, I said, I did the same thing. I said, man, this has really got me thinking. And he said something similar to what I said to my one mentor. Well, can you tell me more about this? I said, yeah, in fact, let me contact you in a few days and let's talk about this. Again, there was the cooling off period. And, am I still interested in it 3 days later? Is he still interested in it 3 days later? And then it's like, okay, now let's get into the nitty gritty. Show me what's going on here. And we figured out a way to make a coalition of skills. And I said, I see how to do exactly what you're doing and realize 10 times the amount of cash. And I meant this literally. And he's looking at this, and I explained it to him. And he said, oh, that's genius. It was right there. Mm-hmm. And then we talked about partnership. And they said, well, let's stew on this for a few days. And when we talked again, I said, okay, you're doing all this already. And I've kind of given you the idea of how to take the next step. It doesn't seem to me like you need me at all. Chris Voss. He said, well, no, you see, I see what you have a talent for this and I have a talent for that.
It's really interesting. I'm sorry, David. It's I'm still processing the question because it's a no-oriented question, and it let them justify themselves and exactly why they would want to work with you. Really interesting take to actually save a lot of time immediately, right off the bat, to get them straight. Where are we at, right? Are we moving with this? Are we not moving with this? Just lay it out straight for me, right? It's and again, this is kind of a question that you don't hear people ask. Like it's not something that's people are comfortable with.
Right. Chris Voss says it's the only why you use. Why do you want to work with me? I just gave you enough information to do it without me. Are you going to pick my brain for 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months and then not deal with me anymore? And if that gets straightened out in the beginning, you have a lot more basis for trust. And if it's not straightened out every day, you're wondering, just what I just said, is he picking my brains and then going to leave me behind? Does he need me at all? Tell me why you need me. Because if there is a why in your own brain, I don't have to plant it there. And if I try to plant it there, you can say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And you don't mean it. You're trying to shut me up so I stop selling. That was a really interesting transition for me to get past. You don't have to sell yourself.
Very interesting. How would you distinguish negotiation from sales? What's the line there?
Well, sales is a form of negotiation. And historically, it's just been a form that's depended upon a lot of BS, a lot of force and dominance and hypnotic suggestion, and using the knowledge that the great many people operate from, not a very sophisticated mindset. People are very hypnotically suggestible. If I tell you, you want this thing I invented because this is a good thing, they don't care. If you tell them, oh man, this thing I invented, people love it. Everybody's buying it. I can't imagine what life would be like without it. Then a lot of people are like, oh, I can't imagine what life would be like without it. And they don't need it, want it, care about it. They can't afford it, but they got to buy it now. So, and people are very susceptible to that form of manipulation. So even the old style sales works. You just have to determine, does it work as well as you want it to work? Does it fit with who you want to be? It doesn't fit the integrity of who I want to be. And that, I'm not even trying to put anyone else down when I say that. If it fits your integrity, it does, but it doesn't fit mine. I can't deliver it. I understand it works, understand why it works. And I can mock it up like a pro. In a mock sales pitch, I can do it just like any cheesy salesman, but in real life, I can't. It doesn't fit. It's like, instead of telling you why you need me, I'd rather have you tell me why you need me. Now we got something. And that even applies to dating. How many people look at someone, you're so pretty, I have to have you. Instead of like, why are you hanging around me? What do you want from me? That works incredibly well. The most beautiful people in the world lack self-confidence. They want you to like them. So let them do their own selling. It's hard to get past. We don't believe in it, but it's real.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's coming back to what you said. As long as they are engaging you, they want something. They are there because you're keeping their attention and they focusing on something specific that you bring to the table. So it is your job to figure this out, to be curious, right? And only when we are kind of becoming tense and anxious and we looking for the approval, some sort of approval that here I am, do I worth your time, spending with me? Like, what do I need to keep you engaged with me longer? That's kind of, and I'm asking it myself and trying to find the answer. It's like the dialogue, the resistance that you bring into the table, the tension is just killing it. And rather than just be with it, rather than just be with this curiosity, this thing that appeared of you, the opportunity, the person, the situation, and be open to it. And that seems to be your kind of mindset. And I love what you were saying about yes, and how yes is your default response. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying mostly is the communication, like the way I like to look at it is when we engage with someone, there is certain amount of discomfort present immediately. There is, expectations from their side, expectations from your side, and you thinking about how they're going to match. So there is already some sort of a tension. So the way I'm like looking at this, it's the cognitive load. Like, how much overloaded are you in the moment? Your cognition, your systems. Are you getting too excited, overexcited? Are you getting too, over anxious? That's going to derail you from authentic communication, high impact communication. Or are you actually being present with this? And you could actually notice this response in another person. And once you bring it up, it's like, oh my God, like it looks like there's a lot of tension here. It seems like something is bothering you. You kind of bring it out to the conscious level. Then you're both staying with this, and it's no longer a factor. It's something you consider and dismiss if not necessary. And if that's an issue, well, you can explore it even more and see what stands behind it. When in a lot of conversations, what's happening, people are just hammering through each other. They don't bring out emotions to the conscious level. They tuck it under the rug, hoping it's going to go away, and it never goes away. It just grows. And if you continue not noticing it, then it becomes at some point detrimental to your relationship, because your counterpart will be thinking that you're ignoring them. you're ignoring the big aspect that's keep coming up and you're ignoring it. So it's not productive to the long-term relationships. It derails your conversations. It adds to the anxiety levels. And in general, that's just not the best approach to communications. So what I would like to ask you, David, is, it seems to me you're coming from the yes, default answer to everything would be yes. And yet you have to consider, your counterpart and realize that loss aversion is there all the time, that no is the dominant answer they haven't they had. So how do you put this all together, yes and no, and what kind of use do you have for both of these very powerful responses that you get, yes and no, from your counterpart?
Uh, You kind of brought up an interesting point. It got me thinking. The emotionality has to do with our own sense of what the stakes are. And for instance, there's one, well, just one at this point in my life, very high stakes negotiation. It's interpersonal. It's with a co-parent, and because it's with a co-parent, there's a child in between, and because there's a child's well-being, you could say there's a hostage, a living hostage that I care about. And so the interesting thing, what really ramped up my interest in negotiation was I wanted to negotiate with her in a way that would be non-hostile, that would respond to offers of hostility with offers of peace. And I became very determined to practice this as a way of being. And because I now really do practice this as a way of being with everybody except her, this is very easy for me. I don't have anything comparable at stake. I don't need you to do business with me. I don't need her, some person, to be my girlfriend. I'm open to what's real rather than insistent upon my need. And so in that regard, after all these years, I'm not that nervous about most negotiations. You could say most negotiations occur to me as simply an offer for friendship. But that's after a lot of practice, a lot of study. Now, in this high stakes negotiation, every time we communicate, I have to be prepared to be provoked. This is a person who knows what will provoke me from a long-term relationship. She knows how to make me feel a sense of fear or anger or loss. And so most times when she's communicating with me, it's from that angle. And I know it's going to be from that angle. So if I get an email and I know I have to look at it, I have to prepare for that. I have to take the edge off of my emotions because I know the minute I read that, I'm going to be angry and upset and feel completely lost and disempowered. And you actually taught me a technique I've been using recently. And it's not the only technique I use, but it's been very powerful, is the EFT tapping. Acupressure and affirmations is essentially what it is. It's telling your brain the state you'd prefer it to be in, and using neurology and energy, an understanding of the body to help to get your brain to accept that. And that's helped a lot. I have to prepare for every communication I have with her because we have a habit, and she knows how to provoke that habit. And I'm aware that when I enter that habit, it's going to be useless. I'm going to be upset. There's going to be no gain. There's going to be a loss. So I can prepare by doing this affirmative process that gets me prepared to see that she's just said or threatened something designed to diminish me, so that my comeback might be hostile, which in court makes me look like a bad guy, or my comeback might be weak, or it might be acquiescent. She's trying to set me up to be something other than I want to be. And that's fair game. That's old style negotiation. The first thing you got to realize, it's People can try anything they want. If I want something from you, I can pull out a gun and try and take it from you. I can beat you up. I can just badger you. I can do anything I want. You can't assume that I'm not going to be a bully. All you can do is prepare that if I am a bully, you're going to respond to it from something that allows you to come out okay. And if you can get certain people off of their bully behavior, they might be people you can do business with. They might not. If they have to lead with bully behavior, maybe it's, do I want to deal with this every day of my life just to make some money? Or to have a girlfriend or whatever, boyfriend if you happen to be a woman, or gay or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you want a relationship, we look at the way they look and say, I got to be with that. We don't take a moment to say, wow, that person is mean. I don't want to be with that. And yet, if we can do that, if we can prepare ourselves to not be desperate, to not be provocable, it can make a tremendous difference in what's optional for us.
Wow, you brought an interesting point. First of all, EFT or tapping, for those of you who are not aware, it's scientifically proven technique. More than 150 peer-reviewed studies been done, actually even more by the date. And it's just like David said, it's working with your neurology, your physiology. So by using certain stimulations on your body, you're able to communicate with your nervous system, and in return, nervous system, again, scientifically proven, sends the signal to amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing emotions, and it calms it down. So in essence, within a few minutes, you could consciously calm down your amygdala, your emotional processing center, calm down, feel more grounded, centered, reduce the tension, anxiety. And then what's happening as a result, you're gaining a whole different perspective on the situation, because the emotions that were running on subconsciously were contributing to the decisions that you're making and how you're seeing the situation. And situations are most likely is a combination of your past experiences and how you project the past experiences to the present situation and then project the future outcomes. So in essence, you engage in this feedback loop that never ends, because you already consider yourself, going through the situation multiple times. So you keep running these loops. So what you're doing with EFT or tapping, you're consciously disrupting your thought patterns, your loops, your emotional dynamic. And then what it introduced the influx of new energy, new thought patterns, new perspective into your situation, to negotiation, the engagement that you have to go through next. So that's a fascinating point. And what it's teaching me, I've been practicing it on and off for about 10 years now. And when David, when you say about like, my partner knows my weaknesses, she knows how to trigger, anger, resentment, all the negative kind of connotations. If we able to shift our mind and says, the partner is actually showing us how I get triggered, how I get angry, what needs to happen for me to get triggered, what needs to happen from outside. It's certain button. It's like a button on your psyche that someone pushes, and it runs this subconscious programs all the time, and you're not even aware of it, because it's so strong, the response, that you're overwhelmed and you're going through the motions immediately, and until you calm down. And sometimes when you're calming down and you're looking back, it's like, just like with the pride point that I was making about the pride, you're coming back to this. Once you sit on it, once you process the emotions, it's like, wow, that was not the best response I could have chose in that situation. This is not the best. This is not my best self. And what we got to realize is that anger, frustration, anxiety, well, first of all, you cannot stress yourself to a solution. Solution comes from the creative space, from the open space, from curiosity, from trust, from faith, it doesn't come from stress and overwork and overwhelm and sadness, anger, anxiety, fear. In order for you to come to the best decision in your best possible high performance peak states that you could be in, creative states, that's going to be the best possible solution you can come up with at this given moment of time. But again, if you're coming back to the mindset shift, if we could just shift our perspective to whatever or whoever making you angry to what is out there that makes me angry, and sit on it, realize that there are certain triggers that are happening that trigger this emotional response. And then there are all sorts of things you could do, because now you have a problem to go through. Like, a good stated problem is a half solved problem. You brought it to the conscious level. Now you have certain tools to apply in order to change the situation, change the response, and that's how you prepare yourself for the engagement. This is how you prepare yourself for negotiation. How you become smarter, self-aware, more emotionally intelligent. Because what you have to realize, another mindset shift, is that if this person triggers this emotional reaction within you, in order for them to do that, they have to be in those states. This is not something that they do to you. It's something that the dynamic that they bring to the table. So what's happening is that once you realize that this kind of triggers are no longer within you, that you're not being pushed anymore, these buttons are not engaged anymore, now you can genuinely explore the dynamic that's happening on the other side. And if there's something you've been contributing to make it worse, or is it actually you? Actually, it might be 100% your fault that's the dynamic that were triggered. So there are all these multiple triggers around you, and the more you kind of explore, the more you're becoming self-aware, the more realize how responsible you are for the conversations you're having with the people, with your counterparts, whether it's in negotiation, business negotiation scenarios, or even with family members. And that there is a lot you could do actually to influence situations without even opening your mouth, or even before opening your mouth.
What you just said there really got me thinking. What if this person isn't doing this to me at all? What if this projection comes off of me so strongly that she has no choice but to treat me this way? And we're not in the habit of taking responsibility for that level. But if I anticipate that she's going to communicate to push my buttons, this gets a little more ethereal, spiritual, whatever. But what if that expectation is what's actually causing her to do it? And so, by tapping out the emotional intensity before I actually read her in communication, so that I can receive perhaps what's underlying it rather than the top layer of hostility. And then tapping it out again before I deliver my return communication. There's this theory that I can change, you said it, change the nature of this existing dynamic. It's very easy for me to go into blame about her behavior. I would venture to say that a lot of people, if they were to look at it all objectively, would tend to agree with my point of view. And yet, that doesn't matter. All the votes in the world don't solve my problem. Only being responsible for what I bring to the table. And if I'm responsible for it, maybe then it creates the option for her to be completely different with me. I suspect she's not this way with anyone else. So there's something in me that is generating this situation just as much as her. And this may or may not be true, but if we adopt this point of view, we have a sense of power going into a situation in which it seemed entirely powerless.
It's interesting because it brings us to the concept of empathy. And empathy is kind of it's really hard for a lot of people to grasp the idea of what empathy is. And there are three types of empathy which are recognized by the modern science. And one of the first type of empathy is actually emotional empathy. So emotional empathy is one of the first things. It's probably built into our DNA, or maybe there's something we learn very fast in our childhood, is when your mother smiles at you, you smile back as a child. On the other hand, if there are strong negative emotions around the in the conversation and the child is present, the child is most likely to react by crying. So that's the emotional empathy. You could also call it as emotional contagion, because the emotions are contagious. You could look in your life and found any number of situations when you've been provoked by anger. You got hooked by anger, or by guilt, or by shame, or fear. You got hooked by it, so you respond to it in a fear-based response. So the same goes for curiosity. The same goes for compassion. The same goes for joy. Those emotional states are contagious too. Just like when you smile at someone, the other person smiles back at you. So a lot of people starting negotiations or conversation with stress, tension, and fear or anger, and without realizing that there's going to be a response, whether you're going to notice it or it's going to pass by you, but there's going to be a response. So now, knowing that, in science is actually this part of the brain is called mirror neurons. So there is a certain part of our brain that's responsible for mirroring moods, motions, emotions, and physical actions of the other people. So in essence, now knowing that, you have to be more responsible, more accountable in your in your outcomes when it comes to negotiations or conversations, because inevitably you're bringing this certain dynamic to the conversations. So in essence, if you can prepare yourself, if you can calm yourself down, if you can adjust the energy levels to the more productive levels, right, then you have a better outcomes, better success chances in your engagements. And David, I would like to come back a little bit to the business side. And I've seen it seems like you've seen a lot, and there is clearly a long path from the moment you kind of were doing your thing for free, trying to help people out, not knowing how to ask people for money, to the point where people coming to you and basically saying, this is what I got, will you take my money? And then you kind of explore it, like, will I take your money or not? So what is the craziest thing you've seen in the business?
What do you mean by the craziest?
Okay, some of the things that majority of people would consider uncommon. Some kind of a deal that seemed impossible, and yet the craziest thing happened.
Well, one of the ones that would defy most people's belief was I bought a commercial building, and you'll hear stories like this in a void, as if someone just used their brilliant charisma to talk someone into doing something stupid, but that's not really the way it works. I was looking to buy a commercial building, and again, it was a daisy chain of letting a person know who let a person know who connected me to a person, who had a commercial building for sale. And their motivation was high. They wanted to sell this building, period. That was they weren't nearly as motivated by how much money they were going to get as by the fact that they wanted to change the ownership of this building. That was a very high motivation for them. So that's the first sign that they're probably interested in doing something creative or out of the ordinary. And in this particular deal was structured such that they would carry the down payment, finance the down payment, so that a bank would carry the bulk of the loan, and they would lease it back. So the net result was that at the closing, I took ownership of the building, and instead of putting money into escrow, they put $300,000 into escrow for me. So I got a building and $300,000. Now there's a lot of logistics to that. When you tell that story, it sounds, wow, amazing and magnificent. It kind of is. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And once you know you can do it, why would you want to do it a different way? But most people wouldn't think that, because the practical application of that was somebody gave me a building worth something like $1.5 million and $300,000 on top of that. That was the
Yeah,
immediate result.
that sounds crazy.
Yeah. If you go into that deal more deeply, you would see the reasoning, and you would also see the outcome. And the real truth is, for entirely different reasons, I lost that building, because when I went forward to restructure that building and upside it, you add tenants, you add income, and it becomes worth more than you paid for it. In that case, I ended up dealing with the wrong person, someone who I very much believed in, and my asset became too tightly tied into what they did. So I didn't lose that building because I made that deal, but I did then make another deal to improve that building with the person who simply didn't follow through on their end. And had they done so, that would have been a really magnificent deal. So that was a very convincing human being. I put very high stakes on one human being because they were so convincing. That's the other side of negotiation. Someone can be very convincing, but not very either willing or capable of doing what they said they would do. And that's a hard lesson too. That's why things really have to be qualified. That's a deal that initiated very strong. And there's no reason that I couldn't initiate deals like that and make them succeed. In this particular case, you see both ends of the spectrum. You see what happens when you're very aware of how to you use another person's motivation to make something extraordinary happen. And then you also see where you can use another person in a way they shouldn't have been positioned that way. I shouldn't have positioned myself with them that way. That should have been cleared. That's a big lesson in negotiation. In terms of real estate deals, I've done others like that. That was the biggest front loaded payday. That was the kind of thing when you ask, is it crazy? There's people who do deals like that on the multi-million-dollar level. I'll give you another example. I was involved with a group who wanted to buy big lots of foreclosed apartment complexes, and someone got an inside track with a bank and said they're willing to sell us $100 million worth of property for 20 cents on the dollar. And all we got to do is raise the capital. And So we're brainstorming it, and the people who said they would raise the capital said, well, which buildings should we take? I said, take all of them. And they were, how do we do that? And this is where my experience came in. I said, we buy it for 20 cents on the dollar. We immediately sell it for 35 cents on the dollar. We make $15 million and walk away. And they liked that idea. It was a great idea. They had never thought of it. Now, again, the problem with this particular group of people is they were greedy. Once they had my idea, they thought, we can do this. We can cut everybody out of it. And they didn't succeed because it's like that other partnership I told you about. When you bring something to the table and someone else brings something that you really don't have the mind for, my idea is not going to help you. You didn't just need my idea. You needed my guts. You needed my influence. You needed my drive. You needed me to bring that piece into the puzzle. And that's why we negotiate. That is why we negotiate, because we need each other. I can't, when you try to, maybe you've tried to do this, a lot of people, when you start a business alone, you just can't succeed, because one of the first things you discover is a business is more like 15 businesses or 15 business skills. And let's say I know how to make these beautiful, brilliant, artistic tables out of wood. And they're just magnificent tables. They could sell for $10,000 a piece. So I make a table. Why can't I sell it for $10,000? Or why can I sell one but not 100? Because you need someone who's good at selling. You need someone who's good at building a website. You need somebody who's good at the supply chain. You need someone who understands that we have to convert this into a mass production process. And you need people to do the accounting and the legal. You need a team of 7 people before you can do anything. And everybody thinks, well, I know what needs done. I'll just do it all. And soon you're not building tables. The one thing you're actually good at, you can't do it because you're trying to do business. That's why we negotiate. That's why we form partnerships. Someone who can build a website doesn't know how to fill it with content. Someone who knows how to build the content can't build the table. And the guy who can build the table can't do anything else. He's a magnificent table builder. That's where his heart and his soul and his talent lies. He's got to negotiate with other human beings to get this to market. Everything's like that. Everything. To make a lot of money at real estate, I had a huge team. And in the end, all I did was negotiate. So one of my money people, you need someone who raises money for you. And although I had a talent for that, there was someone who had a better talent for that. And as I proceeded further and further, he said, so what do you do now? I said, I sign papers that say I own the property. And a few months later, I signed papers that say I don't own it anymore. And then some money goes into my bank account.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
No, I was responsible for the whole thing because my name was on all the papers. I was the guy at risk. But everyone else was doing all the work.
So David, what is the biggest deal you've cut before, if you're comfortable sharing?
Well, it might be one I've been working on these past few months. I work with these guys to put on seminars, training for men. And a lot of it has to do with some of the things we're talking about, helping men to get out of a state of being stuck or disempowered or trapped in expectations and onto a more creative vision of who they want to be. And the guy who leads the seminars is very, very dynamic and powerful. Man, can he cause a breakthrough in human beings. And one of the men who has been through it is a brilliant marketer. He sort of understands how to connect to people. So as they teamed up together, suddenly there's massive influx of people. The guy who runs the seminars, Carl, brilliant at running them, but if he's running these seminars, he can't do marketing. And he's not excessively talented at marketing. His talent is human to human transformation. So he's trying to do the marketing too, and you can't really get ahead. This other guy, I know how to do marketing. You're brilliant at this. Let me put people in your room. And because I've been going through this process and seeing what it does with guys, I've become very, it's sort of my heart work to help this grow. And there were a whole bunch of people who really wanted to make it grow, but they couldn't seem to understand one another. And I thought, well, this is where I come in. If I want this to go on, I have to help all these players to communicate with one another in a way that works. Because I can see they're failing at it. And if they fail at it, it won't explode like it wants to. And I want it to explode. This is something I care about. I didn't particularly care to not be in the cash stream or in the business, but I very much care about what it's doing for people. And I thought, I got to step in. But I have this rule. If I'm going to help you make money, I get some of it. To me, that is not fair. We will all resent it if I contribute to this explosion and get nothing. So I said, to me, that's going to be worth 5% of this business. And if you understand and agree to that, I'll jump into the business. So if you don't understand and agree to that, I'll still support these transformational events, but I can foresee that they will not grow, that you'll struggle financially until you can't bear to do it anymore. And I said, I don't want that to happen.
Wow.
So that I jumped in to just negotiate, help them negotiate with each other. So I see you have something on your mind.
I'm really curious to get your take on modern communication. What do you see as the best channel for communication? A lot of people, especially young people, are using like Messenger, WhatsApp, any number of messengers available online to communicate through text. A lot of people doing billions on the phone, and yet even more old-fashioned people prefer to do it eye to eye. How do you think it spreads? Like, if you were to suggest your ratio, like how do you negotiate a deal? At what stage? What would be the better negotiation channel? Or it's all individual and it's all really depend on the context?
For me, I think the deal gets done face to face. And then these details for me, I like to work out by email. I don't believe I can do effective negotiation by email. I think once the thing is in place, email gives me a chance to think about it, write it, edit it, detail it, and send it out. And then when I get a response, to see it on paper, to see their thought process and work with that. But for me, now this is kind of face to face. It turns out I like Zoom better than I thought I would. So we have COVID to thank for that. This has a lot of the benefits of face to face. You can't transfer that electromagnetic energy that people have in person, but people either come across as believable or not when you can really see their face and hear their voice. I think that's a big element of it. Since a lot of business is paperwork, email doesn't bother me. And text, I only use text for brief things. I hate the idea that this little thing with my thumbs is a typewriter. Maybe I'm just old fashioned. My kid can do the phone much faster than I can do a keyboard. but I can do a keyboard much faster than I can do a phone. So
Yeah, I can see that in a lot of cases, people like, because for me, when I use keyboard or phone, it seems to me to communicate certain ideas or brainstorming, it's a waste of time because you are not able to communicate as much information if you would through voice, or if you were through video, or if you were in person. The ideas become kind of dry in a sense. You don't know how they're going to be perceived, how it's going to connect to whatever they're doing right now or feeling right now. The details, yes, the details have to be in writing. It has to be an email or other form that you could see the details, really chew on it, really process it, and then give the feedback. And at the same time, you cannot negotiate on the email. You can negotiate small details, but you're going to lose so much information if you communicate through text. And it seems to me a lot of people are not comfortable engaging in difficult conversation if it's on the phone or on the eyes. It's much easier to resort to email because in essence you're putting this wall of screen in front of you. You can dedicate any given amount of time on cultivating response, and then once you satisfied, you send it out, but then you never know how it's being received. So I think in this case, when you're negotiating the implementation phase, or when you need to learn about your partner a bit more, then you cannot really resort to emails. You cannot resort to text. It has to be eye to eye or person to person, or at least the phone.
that's the way I feel about it. And even now, as we're talking together, we get a sense of one another. We've actually met online. You're in Southeast Asia and I'm in California, and we're talking on vastly different time zones. But we've gotten to know each other through this. And there's a really strong chance we'll never meet actually human to human. But we wouldn't have a sense of each other if we didn't have this venue. And just to have this conversation, to have your podcast, we had to negotiate. And I think if anyone is looking at this, what I think they should know is I'm negotiating with whoever is looking at this right now too. I'm putting forth who I am so that in the best of all worlds, hundreds, thousands, millions of people would see it, and some of them would say, oh, that's an interesting person with some powerful business ideas. I'd like to do business with him. Or that's an interesting person who I'd love to have a conversation with. I'd like to be friends with him. Whenever we open our mouth, we're negotiating. And because I'm doing this online, I am theoretically, potentially negotiating with every human being on earth. That's never been possible before. Now, in practicality, I'm only negotiating with the people who see this. But who knows who will see it? Who knows? It's possible that millions of people will see it. It's possible that 0 people will see it. But I am putting forth what I believe is propositions that may be compelling to some people. And they'll be like, I'd really be interested in communicating with that guy. I'd really be interested in saying, hey, I've grown my business to this point, now I'm stuck, or I want to start this business, or I need some capital to grow this business. Do you know what I can do here? I have some interesting answers to questions like that. It may not be the answer you need, but if you need an answer like that, I'll have one. Or I might have questions. And I have access to these resources. Did you ever think about this? And it doesn't mean we'll do business together. It means it's worthwhile to say yes to a potential conversation and see what happens.
Wow, David, we kind of coming to our time today. I would like to ask you one or two questions before we kind of wrap it up. And what is the common myth, one common myth about negotiations you would like to debunk, shall we say?
Well, I think it's in the process we were talking about, the idea that it's all about attempting to dominate or influence another human being. And I don't know that that's a myth. I think that's a way to go. I'm discovering there's a more powerful life. There's an easier life. That's in my value system. There's an easier life in doing it a different way. If you're a person, and as a younger person, I was this person. If you're a person who needs to feel the back pressure, who needs to feel a sense of conflict or domination, maybe everything I said and that you said comes across as a bunch of baloney. But if you're thinking, I'd like to have better results with less effort, I'd like to have less heartache, I'd like to have less anger, I'd like to have access to more money with less effort. I'd like to get out of my job, and I believe I can, but I don't know how to do it on my own. If you're looking for access to the possibility that things could be better and easier, I consider that call it a more mature form of negotiation. I wouldn't say the other kind doesn't work. I think it does. It just, I don't want to invest my life force into something that drains me more than it feeds me. And I think there's an opportunity here for people.
100% there. And I thank you so much for coming today and sharing your perspective, sharing your life experiences, your advice. I really appreciate it. And David, how do people connect with you? How do people learn more about what you do? Talk about potential business. What's the best way to reach out to you?
That's an interesting question. Do you know where you're going to post this podcast?
Well, we're going to be on YouTube and on Facebook groups around. So maybe you have your Facebook or LinkedIn profile that people can connect through.
Yeah, if this is showing up primarily on Facebook, friend me on Facebook, David Lindemuth, David Lindemuth. Currently, my profile picture looks pretty much like that, and my daughter's in it with me.
Sweet. So we'll include the links in the podcast below. So for anyone who's watching, you can find David easier.
Yeah, if you do that, I'm actually willing to give out my personal email. It's not like you can really hurt me with it. People spam me, I'll block them. But if so, I'd rather be friended first and then reach to me by email. But I say yes to communications.
I say yes to communications too. I think that's the perfect way to to end up today's session. Let's say yes to communication and continue learning, exploring, collaborating these ideas, and just the principle of high impact communication, how we can all, move forward together and make a world a better place. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, David. Speak to you in the next one.
Yeah, I've appreciated the opportunity. I'd like to talk to you again. Thanks.